What's going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's live Q&A for the U.S. audience. It is Wednesday, October 26th, 2022. Hope you guys are doing well. As you can see, we've got Rafa Torres in the house tonight.
Yeah. Hi everyone. It's a pleasure to be here.
Rafa's visiting us from Spain right now.
Mhm.
I'm sure you guys have seen him on the platform. He did an awesome video on olives earlier this year for us.
Yeah,
So he's going to be joining us for the live Q&A. So feel free to throw out any questions
of course.
that you want in regards to things like olives, maybe Pinus sylvestris, Scots
Yeah,
pines, and of
yeah,
course like Sabina junipers, for
yeah, of course.
example, right? Or just anything about European or Spanish bonsai in general. So it looks like we got quite a few people already filtering into the chat here. So feel free to go ahead and start throwing some questions in there. Just to give you kind of an update on why Rafa is here, we're actually going to be having our open house event this coming weekend on October 29th and 30th. So Rafa is going to be doing some workshops in the mornings. Both of those days, the workshops are totally full, but in the afternoon, he's going to be doing some demonstrations in the workshop. So if you want to come out, check that out, hang out. We're going to have trees, pots, tools, stands, scrolls, all sorts of stuff for sale at this open house. It should be a lot of fun. I think we're going to have a pretty good size group coming
Yeah,
through for the weekend. So you
yeah, we
pumped
will
about it?
enjoy a lot. Yeah,
Most
for
definitely.
sure.
I
Yeah,
think it's going to be fun. We got a
come.
lot of people in the chat tonight. This is fantastic. So
Good.
we're able to overlay the questions now on here, which is great. So
Yeah.
let's see. We've got the very first question here. I'm going to go ahead and put this on here. This is from Vicky. Vicky says, I acquired a large old Doug fir this summer. It's extremely root bound and weak. I've been trying to get it to gain enough strength so that it can be transplanted this spring. Can you provide some guidance on repotting? Yeah, so Doug fir, I'm assuming that this is probably a Yamadori. If it's root bound, it's probably a Yamadori that's been out of the ground for a significant period of time. My guess is it's probably been repotted multiple times. Maybe you could clarify, a little bit further down in the chat here. But if it has been repotted in the past and it's in, say, a good bonsai pot, for example, um, more than likely the root system has been worked. It's got a lot of fibrous roots in there, for example, and you don't really have like an old core of soil taking up a majority of the root system. So you're not really going to have to work that back. Now, if I'm wrong about that, and it is an old Yamadori that has been in a pot, just after collection, like it's in a wooden box, for example, and has never been fully transplanted, you're going to have to work the roots a bit more carefully and be careful not to take out too much of the core soil. In general, though, I would recommend that you don't take off more than about 30% of the roots and no more than about, say, 40 to 50% of the total soil mass on the tree when you repot it in the spring. Hopefully the tree is strong enough. You said you've been trying to get it strong enough to do the repot. So hopefully it's looking pretty good. If the buds are really fat and juicy that are setting up right now, it's usually an indicator that the tree is pretty strong. And next year you should be able to repot it without a problem. But just keep that in mind, like no more than 40 to 50% of the total soil should come off the tree, and probably don't cut more than about 25 to 30% of the roots on the plant when you repot it. All right. Next question here is from Detroit J. He says, I know Scots pine is a single flush pine, but are there any characteristics that are specific to that species? Maybe you could talk a little bit about Scots pine. Like, is there anything that's unique or different about Scots pine, say, to like a black pine or a white
Yeah.
pine or mugo
Yeah,
pine?
it's a single flush, but you can work, depends on the state of the tree, different ways. In the first state, I think is better growing a lot, put a lot of fertilizer on it. And one of the characteristics I think you need to know is likes the cold in winter. We have some in Mallorca, it's a Mediterranean climate, and I think is in the limit of the cold in winter because need to take a rest because normally grow in the mountains maybe until 1,000 more or less
Meters?
meters.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is one of the characteristics important. I think.
Right. Yeah. So Rafa lives on
Mm,
Majorca, which is
mm,
kind of it's an island.
yeah.
So in the Mediterranean climate, it doesn't get super cold down in
Mm,
Palma where
mm.
you live, but up in the mountains it gets pretty cold, right?
Yeah, it's if you are close to the mountain is enough. But if you live, for example, in the south, I don't know here, but you need to know you need cold in winter.
Right. So,
Really thing.
this question is from Detroit J. So I'm
Yeah.
assuming Detroit J is in Detroit. So it's
In
definitely
Detroit.
cold enough,
Cold enough, yeah.
in Detroit to have Scots pine. We can have them down here in Nashville, no problem. As a matter of
Okay.
fact, Rafa's been styling a Scots pine all day today at the
Yeah.
nursery. So they'll grow just fine down here, and we get plenty cold in Tennessee for those pines. One thing I'll say about Scots pine in terms of development, they backbud very, very easily. So if you needle pluck, if you wire the trees up, create little micro tears in the branches, if you fertilize them heavily, you're almost guaranteed to get backbudding. And even on relatively old wood. Now, if the wood is really, really barked up, probably not going to backbud there. But out in the areas where it could be an old branch, but if it's not barked up, it is more than likely going to backbud.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you get backbuds to form?
Yes, normally if we put out the needles in summer, because the light go in and you have proper fertilizer on it on the tree, you get backbuds easily. I
Okay.
think.
Yeah. So
For the next spring,
Okay.
and then you get more and more and more.
Right,
You
so
open the branches and
needle plucking in the summer, open the
Yeah.
branches,
Yeah.
fertilizer, and then sometime
Yeah.
either in that fall or the next year, you should get backbuds all over the tray.
Mhm.
All right, let's see here. Next question is from Victor. Victor says, this is
Yeah.
for Rafa. Is
Well,
the collection of Ulastra regulated in Mallorca?
yeah, you need a special permission, of course, and you need to, because in Tramuntana is the mountains in Mallorca. You have private and public places, and if you talk with the private place and you get permission from the owner, you can do it without problems. From the public and government, it's more difficult
More
to get
difficult.
it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and just to clarify for everybody,
Yeah.
Ulastra is the native
Yeah.
olive that you find, the
Yeah.
wild olive that
The
you
wild
find
olive. Yeah.
on Mallorca, which is very different than the olive that you find in mainland Europe.
Yeah, it's different, and also the from the standard area, because a lot of people think if are in a colder place cannot have uyastre, it's the wild olive, but growing normally in the mountain and it have a very windy, very cold winters, and you have a big range of possibilities.
Okay, so if
Places.
you collect an olive in the mountains of Mallorca,
Yeah.
it could survive in what's the coldest it could survive? Like in
For
Norway?
example, in
In
Norway,
Norway,
we
yeah.
have a student, Marius and Tobias are from Norway and have Uyastres oleas. But wild olive
Wild olive,
is
yeah.
different than standard olive.
Right.
It's important thing.
But they still have to
And
protect those a little bit in the winter,
of
right?
course, a
Yeah.
little.
What's the coldest
Or
temperature they can get to?
as minus something is not a problem. I think
Okay,
the
so
problem
like
is the ice in the leaves.
okay,
It's
okay,
more problem than the colder. Yeah.
then okay,
Mm.
gotcha. All right.
Mm.
All right. This one is not a question, just a comment from Gordon. He
Yeah.
says, "Nice to see you, Rafa." And then he's got a follow-up question here. Let me put this one in here. Give me 1 second here, guys. All right. So Gordon says, this is for Rafa. He says, I've never tried working with olives before.
Mm.
While selecting one to train for bonsai, do you have any recommendations what to look for? Also, do you always look for trees with good carving potential always for olives? So basically saying like when you go out and search for olives, what are the characteristics that you're looking for?
Yeah, I think the most important characteristics is the deadwood, the bark, and if you can get a wild is have a smaller leaves, and for bonsai is better for me. And of course, if you get a standard layer, you can get the fruit, but for bonsai, I prefer is my test small leaves, deadwood, and nice bark because you can get very old and nice bark with combination together. It's a very nice bonsai, in my opinion. Yeah, and also you can call it and you get different types, different styles like bungeons, cascades, powerful. You can get than you want.
Do you do a lot of carving on the deadwood?
I prefer with G-cells, with hand work.
Okay,
I
not
prefer
machines.
than machines.
Okay,
Just I use it for help, but not for draw.
not for the details.
Not for the details.
Okay.
just for clean.
Yeah, actually, next week I'm going to go to Spain with Rafa. We're going to go to Rafa's nursery on
Yeah,
Mallorca. We'll see if we can maybe film a short episode for
yeah,
Bonsai-U on
of
maybe
course.
olive carving,
Yeah, of
possibly.
course. Yeah,
Might be pretty
we
cool.
can
So
we can work with different types of deadwood as well.
cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
so we'll put something like that together for you, Gordon, so you can check it out on the platform. All right. Next question here is from Christopher. Christopher says, can you see junipers being cultivated in the field in Japan? And if not, why is that the case? Yeah, there are field grown junipers in Japan. Obviously mostly Itoigawa. I've never actually visited those fields where they're grown. I have a feeling that a lot of those are actually in the Nagoya area. There are a lot of field growing nurseries in that area, or at least there were in the past. So I think a lot of that material comes from that area, and I haven't really had the opportunity to explore Nagoya very much. I do know they grow a lot of deciduous material in the ground in Nagoya as well, so this is why I'm assuming that a lot of the junipers are grown in the ground there as well. You don't really see a lot of field grown like big junipers. They're usually, if they are field grown, they're dug up when they're kind of medium sized plants, maybe a couple feet wide by a couple feet tall at the absolute largest. So you're not going to see, massive, 5 foot tall junipers being dug up out of the ground. So a lot of the smaller junipers, like Shohin sized junipers, are actually completely container grown as well. It's a lot easier to control the growth when they're in the container, and with the trees eventually becoming Shohin, you don't want to get those out of control in terms of the growth. So that might be why it's not a common thing that you see. But yes, they are field grown in some areas, and actually like the best example of field grown junipers that I've ever seen was not in Japan. It was actually in Brazil, in a place called Belo Horizonte. I was down there for a convention a few years ago. And there was a guy down there who had been growing Juniperus formosana, which is the Taiwanese juniper, in the ground for like 25 years. He was constantly twisting them up every single year. And those trees, the trunks on them were like, I don't know, maybe a foot to a foot and a half in diameter, crazy twisted, maybe between like 2 feet and 4 feet tall, where all the twists were. And then, of course, they let the shoots grow to like 10, 15, 20 feet tall just to thicken the trunks. And of course, those were grafted back. So it is absolutely possible to field grow them, especially if you want to try to get a much larger tree. That's usually a better approach when it comes to junipers. Let's see here. This one's from Larry. What does that say, Rafa?
Buenas tardes, Rafa.
What does that
It's
mean?
good afternoon.
Good
Good
afternoon.
evening. Yeah.
Okay, good evening. Okay,
Buenas tardes.
excellent. Perfect. All right, next question here is from Mac. Mac says, this is for Rafa. Have you ever worked with cork oak, and what can you tell us about them?
Yeah, I have some cork, and it's evergreen tree. Have very nice bark, and you can get easily, like if you can get from Yamadori, you get a very bark, very nice one. But also if you grow from beginning, from seeds, you get easily a new one, because normally if you remove the bark, is the cork. You remove the cork. In 10 years, you get again.
So it comes back
It's
again.
come back again.
Okay.
And you can work, for example, when you have a big cuts, you can clean and get again closer fast.
Okay.
And it's a very nice species for make bonsai. I can show you next week as well in Bonsai-U you want
Cool.
some of them, and also we can explain something
Okay.
about the work on it if you want.
Yeah. Can you defoliate them too?
You can defoliate without problem, but you need to have a very healthy tree,
Very strong tree.
and you can do partial defoliation as well without any problem.
Okay.
Also depends where do you live.
Right. Okay. If you do defoliate them, what time of year do you do it?
Is in Mediterranean, for example, when get mature the new foliage, end of May, more
End
or
of May.
less,
Okay. So
beginning of
basically,
June.
yeah, basically after the first flush hardens off.
Yeah. Also in March, if you want, you can when it start growing, you can remove all leaves without problem. Some of all.
Interesting. That's pretty cool. All right. Let's see. This is just a follow-up from Vicky in regards to the Doug fir that she mentioned. She said it is in a bonsai pot for many years. Yeah. So in that case, you can get a little bit more aggressive, probably working with the roots on the plant, but I would still sort of keep in that range that we talked about in terms of percentages, just to make sure that the tree stays nice and healthy. All right. Next question here is from Jenny. Jenny says, "Are there any North American species that you wish you could work on more often, but are very rare in Spain?"
Yeah, I just arrived now, but I see very nice pine. I like the bunjin you have in the entrance. What's
Yeah.
the name?
We've got it's the shortleaf pine.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
I
native
love this.
shortleaf pine.
It's very cool. The deadwood, I love it. It's
Hmm.
very nice. The foliage is not bad.
Hmm.
I see very good,
Hmm.
like similar silvestris, and also one seed because here you see very nice trunks. I love it, and I see the different types of foliage. We have sabinas and different types of juniper sabinas, and I think the Rocky Mountain, or no, the one seed is similar than Phoenicia, is similar than one of the Mediterranean junipers, and I wish work on it in all ones. I love it.
Yeah, the tree that Rafa's talking about, the
Mm,
one seed
yeah,
junipers, the foliage is very similar to the Phoenicia juniper
Phoenicia
that they
similar,
have
yeah.
there.
Mm,
Yeah, it looks very similar, but the Phoenicia don't get that big,
no,
right? Like
no,
the
no,
one
no, no,
seeds are enormous trees,
no, and also normally have a deadwood similar like Tosho. It's more straight.
like a needle juniper.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's here you see the years very
like very
separate,
spiky,
very
very
nice. Yeah,
spiky
yeah.
deadwood. Yeah. All right, cool. So next up here, I might have accidentally archived
Okay.
two questions. That's all right though. Okay, so the next question here is for Rafa as well. It's from Christopher. Christopher says, "Is it true that some people from the royal family in Spain have interest in bonsai? And if it is true, does it help increase the popularity of bonsai in Spain?"
No, I think it's not the royalty is the no. I think the
Was it the king?
politician.
Oh, the
No,
politician.
yeah, the politician. One of the first, Felipe González, 40 years before, made a lot of bonsai and get popular on the people, and start to do more and more bonsai. And now we have some politics as well, doing bonsai and famous people, and the people getting more and more
More
inside,
popular.
more
Okay.
popular. Yeah.
I had heard that the king of Spain did bonsai, but it's
No,
not true.
I didn't.
Okay. All right.
Never see.
Rafa's not Spanish. Rafa's Mallorquin. It's
No,
different.
no, I'm in Spanish. But no, never see the king.
Not the king. Okay,
No,
so
the
just
royalty.
politicians
For
then.
politicians, yes,
Okay.
some of them, yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, next question here is from Brian. Brian says, "I was considering using the Ebihara technique on a 2 to 3 year old pinky finger thick maple. Number one, would that age be too early to start the technique? And number two, could you perhaps wire it in rather than using a screw?" I would say a 2 to 3 year old pinky finger thick maple is actually a little bit too small. It's too early in the process. Unless it was, say, like an air layer, for example, and it already had a really nice radial nabari, you could probably start the process with it being that small. But if it's like, a cutting or a seedling or something, and it doesn't really have a decent structure to start with, you'd be better off thickening it up a little bit more before you start that. It may, in that process of thickening, produce more side lateral roots or roots directly out of the trunk, rather, that will lend themselves to becoming more of a radial nabari. And if that doesn't happen in the process of thickening the tree, what you can do is root graft onto the base of the plant. But with the tree being so small as it is, you can't really root graft onto it now because you're probably going to weaken the tree. So I would thicken it up first. You said, pinky thick. I would get it a minimum of like thumb thick before you start doing the Ebihara technique to it. Do you do much Ebihara technique at your nursery?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
have
with the
some.
roots.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we do some.
What?
Yeah.
But you don't do it with like olives, though, right?
Not necessary normally.
Yeah.
Olive, when we call it, we cut flat,
Mm.
and you
Then it
get
produces new
roots.
roots everywhere.
You can do like similar maple.
Ah.
You can do properly,
Hmm.
but also if you need it, you can do it without problem.
Okay. Cool. All right. Let me archive that one. Let's go back up here. We got another one here from Gordon. Gordon says, "I read Donald Ritchie's book, which is the." Tractate on Japanese Aesthetics. That's the book.
Hmm.
And he says, "I'm also about 200 pages into the Tale of Genji, and I'm really enjoying it. You should create a list of books on Japanese aesthetics on the platform to read for students. I'm sure many students would like that. Yeah, that's actually a really good idea. The Tale of Genji is a really dense book, and unless you're like really interested in like 11th century Heian, which is like Kyoto city aristocracy, lifestyle and that kind of thing, it's a really hard read. It's a really difficult book to read, but it can be very fascinating if you are interested in that. Other books that I would mention or recommend rather that you check out would be, of course, the Tractate on Japanese Aesthetics that you just mentioned. Um, what's another one? Junichiro Tanizaki's book called In Praise of Shadows. Excellent book, very, very short book, but really interesting in terms of sort of his take on Japanese aesthetics and the use of shadows and the interplay of light. And then another really good book would be the Sakuteki, which is apparently the world's first ever written garden manual. It was written around the year 1000 or 1100, somewhere in that range, which is basically the same time period as the Tale of Genji. And it explains how the gardens of Kyoto were built at that time based on like geomantic principles and divination, sort of like mysticism, kind of. But it's very fascinating. If you ever visit Kyoto, you can see some gardens that are sort of remnants of that. You can see sort of how they were designed based on how the Sakuteki was written. It's also somewhat of a dense book, but it's an interesting read if you're interested in that kind of thing. All right, next question here. This is from Gary. Gary says, for old evergreen or coniferous bonsai, specifically an old Thuja occidentalis, does one typically want to remove bark to expose the live veins, or by removing bark? By removing bark, or does it really depend on various factors? If so, what are those factors? I would say in most cases, I would not remove the bark on those guys. I don't know how long it takes to rebuild the bark, but I would imagine it takes a decent amount of time. So to me, like the exfoliating bark on those guys and sort of the way that it intertwines on the live tissue is more interesting than stripping it off and having it be bright red in contrast with, say, the deadwood on the tree. So I would treat it much more like, say, like a needle juniper. Typically, we don't peel the bark off of those guys. And you can still treat the deadwood with lime sulfur. You can, scrub it down. You can paint it, make it bright white, and it should have enough contrast with the sort of brownish live vein that it's not necessary to take that bark off of there. But to me, that's personal preference. I don't know if there would be any horticultural reason why you might not remove the bark. The reason I mentioned needle junipers, Juniperus rigida, is because removing the bark on those can weaken the plant. I don't know if that's the case with eastern white cedar. Could be the case, maybe it's not, but for aesthetic reasons, I think that's enough, to leave the bark on the plant. I wouldn't take it off. Have you ever worked with Thuja occidentalis?
I have in the garden, but not for
Not for
bonsai.
bonsai,
Yeah,
okay.
but
Just
the foliage is good, and
yeah,
yeah, personally, the bark is personal test
mm,
if you remove or not.
right.
Yes, yes.
All right, next question here is from Jenny. Jenny says, I love seeing the amazing Amadori that are in Spain.
Mm.
Are they difficult to collect? Can you tell us what you do to care for trees after you collect them?
Mm.
I think a lot of us are very interested in that.
Yeah, I think it depends of the species. It's not the same as Scott pine, Juniperus sabina rastrera. I got a permission for Juniperus sabina. I call it maybe 80, and
On the mainland, though,
on the
right?
mainland,
Yeah.
yeah, from the government. And the process is you collect maximum roots, smaller roots possible, and you have two options: remove all the soil in the beginner or keep maximum as possible, but you need to water in different. You need to have a greenhouse, cold greenhouse, not very hot, because depends where you collect. uh, you have different types of temperature, and it's important keep humidity and proper temperature like 18, 20 something, not more, because you can have easily problems. Scope pines, for example, need more humidity after collect than Sabina, for example.
Scots pines need
Yeah,
more
more
humidity?
humidity
Oh, that's
because
weird. Huh.
getting dry easily for the roots, evaporate faster, and you need more humidity than junipers when you collect. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, strangely, because the problem in the Juniper sabina is getting fungus easily if you don't have aeration,
Mhm.
but the pine needs more humidity normally. Yeah,
That's interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
usually
interesting.
it's very different.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's very different.
I don't know why, but
Hmm.
need you keep proper temperature, proper humidity, and of course, no wind is very important, because if you create stress on the tree after collect, because have a lot of stress just moving for the mountain, it's important don't touch too much and have some aeration, but protect for the hard wind.
From the hard wind.
And the other is a lot of different types of species. Olea is easily you can cut all in the base, and you get the new roots,
You
and
can have no roots,
no
right?
roots,
And it still grows.
no branches.
Yeah.
You can keep the oldest ones, but if you need the new ones, you can cut, and you get again new ones. Yeah, and you can do different techniques like a black pack or a greenhouse direct.
Okay. Yeah. We'll when I go to Mallorca next week, we'll
Mm.
shoot some videos on like the black bag technique and all that kind of stuff,
Mm.
so you guys can see exactly what Rafa's talking about.
Yeah.
With the Sabinas,
Mm.
you said there's two ways to collect them. You either get a full root system with soil and you keep the soil and
Yeah.
put it in maybe pumice, for
Yeah,
example, or you take all.
yeah. I depends where do you live. For
Mm,
example, in Mallorca, I think because Mediterranean more cold, more warm,
mm,
I think it's better keep more soil.
more soil.
But if you live in a place like you have a lot of rain, a lot of humidity, you can remove bigger part of the soil
Can you take
also.
100% off, like
Yeah,
with
if you want,
water?
if you want,
Yeah.
because have a good thing is you see where are the roots and how many roots you have,
Hmm.
and because sometimes when you collect, you don't see everything, and sometimes when you remove the soil, you see just have some roots,
Not very many roots.
no
Yeah.
many roots,
Yeah.
and you can water in different. You can do something
You can adjust.
yeah, you can adjust. Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah.
Cool. So yeah, Jenny, if you got more like detailed questions about the collection process,
Mm,
feel free to add that in a little bit further down in the
mm,
chat.
mm,
All right, next question here is from Gordon. Gordon says, Rafa, can you talk about something with respect to bonsai very specific to Spain, species, practices, aesthetics, mindset? So maybe the let's focus on maybe like the aesthetics
yeah,
and the mindset in Spain. Like, how would
yeah.
you say it's different than like Germany versus England versus Scotland?
Yeah,
What would you say?
I think have a big influence in Spain from
Hmm.
Japanese guys in the beginner, and I think I feel now start to change a little and makes more free from the Japanese aesthetics, but also have a mix, a big mix about. And I think the good thing in Spain is we have very good Yamadori, Scott Pines, Olea, wild olive from Mallorca, Juniper Sabina. Now the people start to grafting also with Itoyawa. I like the foliage. You work a lot of times.
Sabina? Yeah,
Sabina,
it's nice foliage.
it's
Yeah.
nice foliage. If you work properly, you can get very, very, very nice one. And we have a very cultural from long time, maybe 40, now 50 years. Start the politician Felipe González is a president,
Mhm.
and influence a lot of the population, and change every decade, change a little and improve. Also have good influence from people from Europe, and we do a mix
Mm,
about, yeah.
very cool.
Mm.
All right. Next question here is from Brendan. Brendan says, "Good evening. Have you worked with Japanese pomegranate? The twisted trunks are very beautiful. Have you worked much with pomegranate?
Pomegranate,
Yeah.
the Nejikan,
Nejikan, yeah.
Nejikan from,
Hmm.
yeah. We have also Mediterranean, but Nejikan for me is nicer because have the twist,
So the
and yeah,
Japanese has the natural twist, and then the
natural
one
twist.
from Spain doesn't.
From Spain is more
More straight.
straight,
Okay.
yeah, it's more fruit typical tree. But I work it, and I have a client who grow for in the grow.
Mhm.
It's growing in the
In the field.
in the field,
Okay.
and makes very very fat. In 15 years, make very nice nejikan. You will see next
Hmm.
week, and you can do as well because if you want to import from Japan, normally are expensive and
Yeah, they're
yeah.
relatively rare. Like in Japan, it's not a super popular
No.
species to work with. There's some amazing examples, though. Like the best one I've ever seen was actually at Bonsai-En Nursery, Mr. Kato's nursery up in the Omiya Bonsai Village. I don't think it's there now, but they were maintaining it for a client. The trunk was probably, I
Wow.
don't know, 2 feet across. The tree was only like 3 feet tall. So it was this short, chunky, like, just fat little dude,
Fat,
but
yeah.
an amazing twist all up the tree. And I think that the tree had won the Kokofu Award at some point. The biggest issue with the Nejikan as they get older is if you kill off a branch on the tree, it's like a juniper. You can kill the vein all the way back down to the base very easily. Same thing if you work the roots too hard in one area versus another area, you could kill the live vein from the base of the tree up to the branch, and you end up with uh, basically like a hollow in that side of the tree, which in terms of Japanese aesthetics and what's preferred there, that's obviously not a good thing, right? You want to
Yeah,
avoid that if at all possible.
yeah.
So
You
that's
need to
one
have.
issue you got to worry about when
Yeah.
you're dealing with an Nejikan. Okay, next up here is let's see here. Also from Gordon. Gordon says, Rafa, are you Japanese trained or someone from Spain/Europe or self trained? If the latter, do you see a need for students or professionals to get a traditional Japanese training?
Not me. I worked with Bjorn. He
I say,
came. Yeah, it's
I'm Rafa's teacher,
yes.
so it's sort
Yeah,
of sort of Japanese trained. Yeah.
yes. Some of Japanese from Bjorn. Also, Bjorn, in my opinion, changed
Mm.
after Japan.
Yeah.
After Japan, and also I have influence because I worked with different species. But Bjorn came 2 times a year from
Maybe four,
five,
four,
six,
five,
yeah,
5 years. Yeah, a
maybe
long
more.
time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for and also I learned from Bjorn a lot, of course.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
do you think that there's a need for people who want to become professionals in
Ah,
bonsai to go
okay.
to Japan to study? Do
I
you
think
think
if
it's a
you,
good thing or
I
necessary?
I think it's a good thing if you can go. For me, it's too late. I need to work and win money. But if
Win money.
but if you are young and you can do it, of course, you feel different because you training with the best professionals
In the
from
world.
in
Yeah.
the world, and also if you are in other place and you can, if you want to do different than Japan, if you studied in Japan, you have the Japanese aesthetics, the Japanese work, the Japanese species, and also you can get a personal uh, work and
Flavor.
taste and
Your
flavor,
flavor. Yeah.
and you are more complete. Yeah.
Yeah. More
Uh,
well rounded, maybe.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. I think that's a good answer. All right, next up here is from Michael. Michael says, I just procured a Harlan boxwood and have read it is not hardy below 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Do you have any experience with them? I've got a couple here at the nursery, or I had several actually at the nursery that I sold off over the summer, but I have one or two that are left here. If you leave them outside below about 30 degrees Fahrenheit, it's not necessarily going to kill them, but it definitely will change their color and you might lose some branches here and there. So in general, I would try to keep them, at or around freezing, slightly higher than freezing in the winter. Michael, I know you're over in Knoxville. It gets relatively cold there. If you keep them in the unheated garage for most of the winter, you should be totally fine. Aside from that, they're relatively hardy trees. Just got to be careful when it gets too cold. Okay, next question here is from Dennis in Alabama. Dennis says, I have a Scots pine I am keeping for a friend. What are the water requirements?
Oh, the water requirements. I think you need to get a little, not wet,
Dry?
dry.
Keep them dry, a
Keep
little on
them
the dry
dry
side?
a little, but depends, of course, how what type of soil you have. The oxygen inside is very important for the roots. This is one very very important thing, in my opinion. You have very like pomies. Depends of the state, of course. You can put more pomies lava if you want, and if you put you can water it more often. But if you start to put other one more softer than like a karama or others you use here, I don't know, broken and make less oxygen inside, you need to get dry a little, because if you have the proper temperature, humidity, and always have the roots wet, you will get easily fungus in the roots, like Phytophthora infestans. And normally after summer, it's easy you get this one
at the end of summer going into fall.
Yeah.
Yeah, so keep them a little on the dry side. Probably not as dry as like a Japanese white pine on its own roots.
No,
little less dry
little less,
than
yeah,
that. Yeah, but not like a black pine where you can constantly water it and it should be okay. I would equate them in the U.S. to something similar to like a Virginia pine. Virginia pines like to stay a little bit on the dry side and need a very oxygen-rich soil, so very aerated soil would be the best way to say it. So maybe a little more lava rock. Pumice holds a lot of water, so I wouldn't go overkill with the pumice, but definitely more pumice than akadama if you want more aeration. So akadama is going to hold the most water, pumice will be second, and then lava rock will hold the least. So adding extra lava rock is definitely a good idea when it comes to Scots pine. All right, next question here is from Gordon. Gordon says, this is for Rafa. Do you like working on deciduous bonsai? And do you have a favorite species and why?
Yeah, I love work with deciduous trees, but normally I have a big amount of evergreen and juniper and conifers, but I love, of course, deciduous bonsai. But my favorite species in deciduous tree or in general?
In general.
In general, the ones, because I have a lot, is the white olive from from Mallorca, especially from Mallorca, Ullastre. Because have everything, movement, bark, small leaves, and you can enjoy it because you can get a lot of types of styles, of course, but also like a lot of Scott pines and junipers, in general.
The Ullastre, the native olive on Mallorca, if you see that sitting next to like a European olive, they look completely different. They're not even on the same level. Like everybody on mainland Europe wants the Ullastre from Mallorca. Everybody. It's such an amazing species. All right, next up here, it's just a comment from Jenny. She says, Sakuteki is how you spell the book that Bjorn just mentioned. So yeah, if you guys want to look this up, it was actually written by I guess it would be the illegitimate son of, I think it was a member of the Fujiwara clan, which was one of the big sort of clans in Kyoto that was tied in with the aristocracy. So a very interesting read. And actually on our Japan tours that we take every year, we actually take the group to a place called Byodo-in, which is a temple complex in Uji, which is kind of on the southeast side of Kyoto. That building was built in around the year 1000, I guess. And that was actually, I think, originally built by the father or grandfather of the guy who eventually wrote the Sakuteki. So it's the oldest wooden building in Japan, and I think the oldest wooden building in the world. It's still intact, never been burned down, never fell down due to earthquakes or anything. So we take our groups there. And by the way, if you want to come on our Japan tour, there's still a few places open, available on the tour. So definitely check out that information on the membership platform or just on my website under the Japan Tours tab. All right, next question here is from Brian. Brian says, thanks for having an open house. I've been wanting to see your nursery for some time. Do you mind sharing some of the types or level of development of plant material that will be for sale during the open house? Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to have everything from nursery stock on up to the most expensive tree you've ever seen in your life. No, I'm just kidding. We do have a very expensive material here as well, but I'd say probably the cheapest material we have here is in... it's probably around like the $50 range, I would say. We've got some really cool like Chinese quinces, small Chinese quince nursery stock that are going to make really nice shohin trees. Chojubai available, Yamadori available. and everything kind of in between. And of course, we've got very finished bonsai as well, into the higher end range in terms of price too. So, and like I said, we'll have pots. I've got tons of new pots in from Japan. And when I say new, I mean new to me, but they're actually very old pots. We've got a lot of really nice old pots with good patina to them. Antique Chinese pots. We've got tools. All sorts of stuff's going to be for sale this weekend. So definitely come and check it out. Looking forward to having you out here, Brian. All right, next up, we've got a question here from Boiteno. He says, what's the best time to do root work on a hemlock? All right, so this is one species that I am not really familiar with. I don't work with them at all here in Tennessee. Never did any work with them in Japan. They're not really a popular species in Japan. And here in Tennessee, we have all sorts of pests and diseases that affect hemlocks differently. So they don't really grow very well in this area. So I don't want to give you bad advice. I would assume similar time to working on, say, like Doug firs or spruces, sometime in March. And I know Boiteno's from kind of the Chattanooga area, so similar climate to what we have here in Nashville, very similar actually. So sometime in like early to mid March would be my guess with that species, but you might want to check with another source just to confirm that that's actually the case. Let's see here. This one's from Gordon. He says, when you say something likes to stay on the dry side and something likes to stay on the wet side, how do you come to know that? Are there any visual indicators? So when it comes to like figuring out what likes to be a little bit dry and what likes to be a little bit wet, some of that's from my training in Japan. Some of that's from experience having my own nursery here back in the States. And really the visual cues when something is being overly watered versus underwatered, or overwatered versus underwatered. Usually, the foliage on a plant that is underwatered, say the tree is drying out too much, say it's a pine, for example, the tips of the foliage tend to turn brown or yellow, and then it sort of works its way back. When it comes to overwatering the plant, usually the whole plant or all of the needles in unison will start to turn kind of a yellowy color. I did mention, I think it was in last week's live Q&A, maybe somebody kind of asked, what's the difference between or how do you tell if something's overwatered, underwatered, underfertilized, overfertilized, because the foliage ends up looking somewhat similar across the board. So I think the advice I gave last week was, if the tree is overwatered, or rather, if the tree is yellow across the board, like the tree just sort of yellows out, it's either probably overwatered or it's underfertilized in terms of micronutrients. So I would back off on the water and add more micronutrients to it, because you don't know which is actually occurring to the tree. So hopefully that gives you kind of a good starting point with the visual cues, but those would be the things that I would look for when it comes to overwatering versus underwatering. All right, next question here is from Christopher. He says, I have a big Scots pine, and on some needles there is a kind of white residue, maybe dried resin. Is this normal with Scots pine? At first I thought it was mealybugs, but it's not. Have you noticed this on white pines at this time of year, that on the needles you get like white sap or
White sap?
resin or
Yeah.
anything?
No,
Is that normal?
no, it's normal. Is you don't get nothing strange in the needles like yellow
He's
or like. But if it is white, it's not a problem. Maybe it's excess of
sap.
sap.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think on Scots pines too, at this time of year, the buds are setting up to go into winter dormancy.
Yeah.
The buds will actually get encrusted with white resin, basically, and probably what you're seeing is excess resin on the needles. If it's something like scale, for example, it will be individual small little white dots that you can easily slough off, and when you slough them off, they'll retain their shape. If it's resin, when you scrape it, or if it's excess sap and you scrape it, it'll turn to kind of powder as you scrape it. So my guess is that it's probably excess resin or sap on the needles at this time of year. All right, next question here is from Gary, and this is for Rafa. He says, in Spain, do you guys use akadama? Given the difficulty in sourcing akadama, is there any movement in Spain to substitute akadama for something else? If so, what material is being used?
Yeah, normally we use, of course, akadama, and it's tough now because it's difficult to get every time. Normally, I buy more than 1,000 bags.
1,000 bags.
1,000 bags.
Jeez,
1,000 bags.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. And now, just the last months, I just get 70, 100 bags. and we need to think about other possibilities and
Is there any idea?
similar.
Do you have anything that might work?
It's difficult now to get similar because this type of soil have special characteristics, and we don't find yet similar. And we use in this moment a little less. We put maybe more. We change a little the mix. We put more pomace in the bottom, and we do the mix in the middle and just some akadama in the top. And before we use more akadama, and you keep the drainage. It's just because you have less, but we don't find yet the
Substitutes.
substitute.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Next question here is from Ted. Ted says, I'm planning on doing a root over rock using a 3-year-old Japanese black pine. How would you pot it? Use a deeper box to sink most of it. Use a regular size pot and cover where you want the roots to grow. I do plan on bringing the materials to your class. Yeah, actually, Ted, if you want to check out on the Bonsai-U platform, if you go to the Bonsai-U library and click on, it should be under the Pines tab. There's a video that I did in, I think it was February or March of this year, where I actually show you how to do a root over rock with a Japanese black pine, actually, of all things. So I usually use raffia to tie the roots onto the rock, and then the whole thing gets buried in a deeper pot. So I definitely recommend that you check that video out. We're going to do a follow-up on that tree. I've got it set aside in the nursery so we can follow up on that at some point. Probably not this next spring. Really, you need to let it go at least 2 full years after you apply the tree to the rock before you start exposing that. So it'll be a while before we do the follow-up. But definitely check out that video. It'll answer your question, I think, in relatively good detail. Okay, next question here is from Big Mike. Big Mike says, I have a 50-year-old Acer palmatum with a nice nabari. I have removed the mat of moss growing on the soil in preparation for next spring's repot. The outer edges of the nabari are muddy and stained. Any advice on how to clean? Typically with Japanese maples, I'll just use water and a toothbrush or a nylon brush to get as much of that gunk off of there as possible. After you do that, you might want to treat the entire trunk of the tree, including the nabari, with lime sulfur. And I would dilute it down to say 20 to maybe 30% lime sulfur and then 70 to 80% water. That'll usually turn it kind of a nice grayish color. And this is actually something that we will do for exhibitions, like at the Kokofu. We'll paint the whole trunk out onto the branches all the way to the tips, just leaving the red tips unpainted with lime sulfur to brighten them up. So the combination of those two things, I think, should take care of that issue and give you a much cleaner looking tree. Is there anything else you would do in terms of
No, I
cleaning
do
up
the
maples?
same when just waiting for the fall,
The leaves to fall?
the fall, and
Mhm.
and clean everything with brush and also water, and then I put protection with lime sulfur.
Okay, cool. Excellent. All right, next up here, we've got a question from Bob. Bob says, what do you mean by micronutrients? What provides these to trees? Okay, so before I give you the explanation here, the best thing to do as a Bonsai-U member is to go to the library, click on the horticulture tab, and there'll be a video on there about fertilization. There's actually a couple videos on there. If you watch those videos, it explains all about the types of micronutrients that you need to apply to trees and where you can access those micronutrients in terms of the products that you can use. But micronutrients would be, well, let's say we got macronutrients, which are going to be your nitrogen, your potassium, your phosphorus, which is going to be that NPK that you see on any fertilizer bag. And then the micronutrients are going to be things like molybdenum, copper, zinc, iron, a whole bunch of other things. And you can get those in products like liquid kelp or liquid fish, for example. So definitely check out that fertilizer video. It'll explain it much more detail in terms of rate of application, timing, foliar feeding versus root drenching. All of that information is in that video. So definitely check that out. All right, next question here is from Christopher. He says, wow, great cue for resin versus scale. Mine is definitely resin. Thank you so much. Awesome. Cool. Yeah, that's the best way to check. Just scrape it. If it pops off and retains its shape as a little dot, that's probably scale. If it rubs off as powder, that's probably going to be resin. All right, next up here, we got one from Derek. Derek says, I let my ume grow out this year to build vigor. The tree has dropped all of its leaves in lieu of winter coming. Can I cut the tree back now or wait till after flowering in early spring. If you want to enjoy more flowers on the tree, you could leave all those elongating shoots on the plant. Once it finishes flowering, you can cut it back at that point. If you want the tree to look nice over the winter in terms of overall silhouette and shape, absolutely nothing wrong with going ahead and cutting it back now that it's gone completely dormant. So Derek's way up further north up in Ohio, so they're a little further along into winter. Our trees here have just started changing color, not really dropping leaves yet. At least the bonsai haven't dropped leaves yet, so I'm holding off on doing anything to our flowering apricots or any of our deciduous trees till they've gone a little bit more dormant. Okay, next question here is from Brian. Brian says, have either of you worked much with flowering apricots, Prunus mume as bonsai? Are they difficult to work with as bonsai? I've worked a lot with flowering apricot, particularly in Japan. At Fujikawa-san's nursery, we had, I'd say, probably a dozen of some of the best flowering apricots in the entire country. So we would do everything from defoliation to wiring to basic pruning, of course. Grafting, we would always farm that out to other specialty nurseries. But it's a species that I'm very familiar with, done a lot of work with. I'd say the biggest things with flowering apricot would be disease. You got to be very careful with disease. Also, they don't necessarily like a lot of heat in the summer. If you ever have a flowering apricot and it gets very hot out in the summer, the leaves will actually curl up into kind of a folded form, kind of a rounded folded form. That's to prevent overtranspiration. A lot of people think that's disease in the summer, but it's not. So you just need to keep them relatively moist, keep them in a little bit of shade. It's okay if the leaves curl up at night, they'll open right back up. But just keep that in mind. So have you done much work with flowering apricot?
Yeah, I have some, but not so much. We have other similar Prunus Mahaleb.
Mahaleb,
It's
right.
nice one, but make just white flowers.
Yeah, Rafa has. There's one Prunus Mahaleb that he has at his nursery that I really, really want.
The
It's a
small,
little Chuhi and Kifu sized tree.
Mammut.
Is that what you call it?
Yeah, the
Mammut.
mammut, yeah.
Yeah, it's an amazing tree.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's no way to bring it back to the States. So even if I bought it, it'd still have to stay
It's
around
nice
the nursery.
species.
Yeah, it's a great plant. All right, cool. It looks like the chat's winding down. So I want to thank you guys for joining us for this week's live Q&A. It was a pleasure to have Rafa here.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah,
Thank
and of
you.
course,
Very good
if you can come out to the event this next week, our open house,
please.
we'd love to see you guys. It's going to be a lot of fun. Demonstrations all weekend, just hanging out, trees, pots, everything for sale. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, of course. We will enjoy it. Yeah.
Cool. So thank you guys so much for joining us tonight, and we will see you guys next time around. Take care. Oh, actually, before we head out, my wife said, I got to remind you guys about the tour one more time. I heard her in the background. Make sure if you want to join our tour, sign up, go to the Japan Tours page at the top. All the information is on there. Hope to see you guys on the tour. Okay. Is that everything? Okay, that's it. All right. We'll see you guys next time around. Take care.
All right.